Good evening and welcome to the second lesson of Outsmarting Anti-Semitism. Today's class is titled No Apologies. And what a wonderful discussion this will be tonight. Welcome back. Good to see you all. It was good to see you last week. It's good to see you tonight. And we always have to begin with showing our gratitude, our hakaras hatoiv to our course sponsor. We'd like to thank Lakeland Metairie Funeral Home and Cemeteries, a dignity memorial provider. Thank you for your generous sponsorship towards this course. Billy Henry, Stephen Sundheimer, and the entire staff of Lakeland, we greatly appreciate your friendship and support to this course and to the many other programs of Chabad Jewish Center. Thank you very much. For those of you who are joining on Zoom, I am going to post a link. If you do not have the book yet, I'm going to post a link to an online PDF of the course, of the lesson student book, so you're able to follow along with some of the reading, some of the texts that we are going to be reading. As always, I love discussion. If you have any questions, comments, rebuttals, whatever it is, please, I'd love to have a dialogue. I'd love to discuss, and obviously if time allows, we could discuss this at great length. It's a hot topic. It's a topic that many of us have thought through, have read about, have heard about. We have many different ideas and explanations and questions. So please share your thoughts with us. Greatly appreciate that. So today we're going to discuss, in our second discussion on anti-Semitism, we're going to discuss the big why question. But before we get to the why question, last week we focused on the proper Jewish internal attitude that we should have to this phenomenon of anti-Semitism. We spoke about do not be fearful, do not be anxious about it, think about the broader picture, think about how God is with us, and most importantly, think about ultimately the blessing comes from above. That's the source of it all. So together with all that we do, that we have to do, the physical matters, we also have got to be involved in the spiritual matters, which draws down to the source of the blessing, the blessing from above. That was last week's discussion. Didn't really deal with anti-Semitism itself. It really dealt about how should we approach as a Jewish person, what is our inner feelings and attitude to this phenomenon. Today, we're going to get a little bit more nitty-gritty. Today, we're going to discuss the big why. Is there an answer to, an explanation to, what is the cause of anti-Semitism? We're going to look at it from various angles. We're going to give an explanation, perhaps from a Torah perspective. And in addition to the actual explanation, we're going to try to understand, once we have a better interpretation, a better explanation to this phenomenon, how this can alter our response, our reaction, or even being proactive to the idea of anti-Semitism. So the better we understand the cause of it, we know how to deal with it. What is perhaps a way to outsmart or defeat or anti-Semitism? Oh, what happened over there? Okay, it's a loose wire. That's all it is. Okay. Hello, Angela. And as we always like to do when we have a new first timer to a JLI class, we got to give a warm welcome to Michael, who is here for the first time to JLI. Welcome, Michael. Welcome to JLI. Hope you enjoy. Good to see you. I'm happy you're able to come in person. So before we get to the actual why question, let's preface the why question with three concepts, three ideas, three things that will make this why anti-Semitism question all the more stronger. And the three things that we're going to preface this with is how this hate is an ancient hate. It's an absurd type of hate. And very often the claims are contradictory. So let's start with the origin. How old is anti-Semitism? So some people assume that the origin of Jew hatred are the Christians, their claim that the Jews killed their savior. And that's where it really all began. And obviously, to a degree, it was a strong uptick in anti-Semitism from the birth of Christianity. But the truth is that the earliest sources that we have of documented liturgy of anti-Semitism dates back already to the 1st century of the Common Era. And these historians are already quoting historians from 300 years BCE. We're talking about 2,300 years ago, roughly. So we'll start with Tacitus. Tacitus was a Roman historian, lived in the 1st century BC, CE, Common Era. And he talks about the story of the Romans' conquest of Jerusalem, which happened in his time or a little bit before his time. And because he's talking to the Romans, he has to tell the Romans, well, who are the Jewish people? You have these Jewish people occupying or living in Jerusalem and Israel. Well, who are they? What's the history of the Jewish people? So he kind of goes on parenthetically, he kind of goes on a small side discussion of the history of the Jewish people. And as historians point out, he is really basing his story of the Jewish people on an earlier Egyptian historian who already wrote this similar ideas in the year 270 BCE, so 300 years before Tacitus. And what's interesting is that when we read his texts, and it's a long text, but we see some of the ideas, the stereotypes that today or throughout the ages have been said about the Jewish people. We already see this in his works. Some absurd and claims of altering history and making all these interesting claims about the Jewish people, but we find this already going back to the first documented written his history of the Jewish people from a non-Jew. So let's read this in text 1. Once during a plague, we're on page 48, text 1. Once during a plague in Egypt, which caused a bodily disfigurement, King Bacchares approached the oracle of Ammon. The oracle of Ammon was like a deity that they would speak to, ask for help, and asked for a remedy. There's a plague, what do we do? Whereupon he was told to purge his kingdom and to transport this race into other lands, since it was hateful to the gods. Interesting. We find the idea of there's a plague. Who's at fault? The Jewish people. The Jewish people are hateful to the gods. These ideas, we'll get back to them. So the Hebrews were searched out and gathered together, then being abandoned in the desert while all others lay idle and weeping. One only of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to hope for help from gods or men, for they were deserted by both, but to trust to themselves. The Jews regard as profane all that we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we adhere, meaning they are totally different values. They don't really see eye to eye with us. They first chose to rest on the 7th day, but after a time, they were led by the charms of indolence to give over the 7th year as well to inactivity, laziness, right? We already have that between the lines. It talks about the wealth that the Jewish people had. We're going to go down to text 2. Text 2 is from another historian, Josephus. Josephus was a born Jew by the name of Yosef ben Matisyahu HaKohen. Interesting history on his own. He writes that he was originally from the Jewish people fighting the Romans, and eventually he surrendered when he was some type of leader or general of a army in the Galil, and he surrendered to the Romans. Eventually he moved to Rome, and then he started writing, documenting the history. We have a lot of that period of the destruction of the Second Temple, and most famous from Mitzada is all from Josephus. He's the one that talks about, if you know what I'm talking about, in Israel, that great mountain where they had the fortress. So he also writes about the Jewish people, and he tries to defend the Jewish people. And he wrote a book called Against Apion. Apion was another historian, I think a Hellenist Egyptian, who also wrote interesting history, made up his own history about the Jewish people. And Josephus felt that it was the right thing to do, he felt responsible to defend his people, to defend the Jewish people. So he wrote a response to Apion. Now, we're not going to go through his response, because that's not the point of the class. But just to see, we're trying to just show how Apion, already way before Christianity, was already writing these things about the Jewish people. So, for example, right, we can read this is text 2. It's a long text. We're not going to read the whole text, but we'll start from the second paragraph, talking about the times of Antiochus, the time of Hanukkah, where the Syrian Greeks came into the temple. And the way Josephus talks about it is that he almost had to, the Greeks felt that they had to defend Antiochus for doing such a terrible thing, coming and destroying and killing it. So they had to defend. So they said, you know what? There must have been some Greek minorities who have been chastised or have been kidnapped and being persecuted by the Jewish people. So we had to save them. So this is the way he describes it. Within the sanctuary, Apion had the effrontery to assert that the Jews kept an ass's head, worshiping that animal and deeming it worthy of the deepest reverence. The fact was disclosed, he maintains, on the occasion of a spoliation of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes, when the head made of gold and worth a high price was discovered. We see the idea of gold, of richness. Now how did he escape from the facts convict him of telling an incredible lie? He adds a second story. This is Josephus quoting Apion of Greek origin, which is a malicious slander upon us from beginning to end. In the anxiety to defend Antiochus, they have further invented to discredit us the fictitious story which follows. Apion, who is there the spokesman of others, asserted that Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining. The king's entry was instantly hailed by him with adoration, as about to procure him profound relief. Falling at the king's knees, he stretched out his right hand and implored him to set him free. He said that he was a Greek and that while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple. There he was shut up and seen by nobody, but was fattened on feasts of the most lavish description. At first, these unlooked for attentions deceived him and caused him pleasure. Suspicion followed, then consternation. Finally, on consulting his attendants who waited upon him, he heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. The practice was repeated annually at a fixed season. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, fatten him up for a year, and then lead him to a certain wood where they would slew him, sacrifice his body with their customary rituals, partook of his flesh, and while immolating the Greeks, swore an oath of enmity to the Greeks, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, this is typical anti-Semitic literature against the Jewish people. So it's ancient. And just from these two texts, what are sort of some of the anti-Semitic motifs that we already see in these texts? So throughout the ages, the Jewish people have been blamed for many things. So from the first text, from Tacitus, we see that whenever there's a big societal problem, who do we blame? Problem in Egypt, there's a plague, who do we blame? The Jewish people. And this happened throughout the ages. In the 14th century, there's the Black Death, the Black Plague. Millions of people were dying. Who did they blame? Many blamed the Jewish people, of course. They poisoned the wells, they claimed. And even now, recently, in May 2020, there was articles talking about the pandemic, COVID-19. Who are we blaming? Of course, Israel, the Jewish people. They started it all. There's always this claim when there's a calamity, when there's a societal problem, you blame the Jewish people. And this goes back all the way to the earliest historians talking about the Jewish people. So we see that already in these texts. We see that concept. We talked about the Jewish people in the desert. They don't work on the seventh day. They don't work on the seventh year. They're idle, they're lazy. Throughout the ages, we've been called lazy, not, good for nothings. We're not going to work enough. They were rejected by the gods. There's another concept. Definitely the Jewish people were hearing this in the Middle Ages, where they were constantly told the same thing by Christians. This almost like justified many to persecute the Jewish people. They're rejected or hated by the gods. Their values are opposed to our values. And therefore we have nothing in common. They're an extreme foreigner that we have nothing in common, and therefore we can treat them as, I don't know what. We find this in these texts as well. Jews are wealthy, obsessed with money, right? There are many, many jokes about that. The two guys, Moshe and Yankel, two Jewish boys walking by a church, and has a big sign, convert to Christianity, we'll pay you $100. Really, $100? That's not bad. So Moshe tells Yankel, says, Yankel, I'm going to try it. Let me see if it's true. Are you really going to pay me $100? So Moshe goes in, Yankel waits outside, and he's there for a couple of minutes. He comes out, Yankel says, no, Moshe, is it true? Did they pay you $100? And they say, what is with you people? All you think about is money. So that concept of Jews looking for wealth, we had that in the text about the head of the donkey being of gold, or about the many donations that even the non-Jews were sending into Jerusalem, the wealth that the Jewish people had, the hate that Jewish people have to non-Jews, the fact that with the story of the Greeks, where they claim that the Jewish people kidnapped a Greek and they killed the Greek, ritual killing. This was something that we have already in this text, and we know that throughout the ages. Unfortunately, we know the concept of a blood libel. Are we familiar with the blood libels? Blood libel started in the 12th century. In 1144, I believe was the first one, where they claimed that there was a missing Christian child, and they blamed the Jewish people. They're the ones. And it didn't really go very far with, in the 12th century, but in the 13th century, about 100 years later, it did take hold. And people said, you know what, that's probably true. And many hundreds of Jews were killed, publicly hung, because they were blamed for stealing, for kidnapping a Christian child, killing the child, and using their blood in their matzahs that they baked for Pesach, for Passover. The absurd, it's like, really? I mean, how do the Jewish people defend that? I mean, what are you talking about? Where does it come from? It's a total made-up lie. We don't kill, we don't drink blood. I mean, it doesn't even begin. It's like almost like silly to even argue with it. But this is what's going on in Europe, in many places. You see in the back of your lesson 2 in the additional readings, you have a full graph of the many incidents throughout history where Jewish people were blamed for ritual killings of non-Jews. You see this already in the earliest texts of anti-Semitism. We see this already, the story of Antiochus, the story of the Greeks, that the Jewish people already killed a Greek with a ritual killing. So that's point 1. The idea of anti-Semitism, the phenomenon, it's nothing new. It's been around all of history. It's ancient. It's an ancient hatred. You could say it goes back to the first Jew, to Abraham. But here we have from historians from outside of Judaism. We see this language about the Jewish people. That's point A. Point B. How absurd their claims are. You know, sometimes you think, if all they claimed were Jewish people are dishonest, Jewish people steal from others, you know what? I would say, you know what? I know Jewish people who stole from others. You know, Bernie Madoff was a Jew. There are many Jews who are not loyal, are not moral, they're not noble people. I mean, well, okay, maybe there's some truth to their claim. But then when at the same time, they're also claiming that we caused the plagues. They're also claiming that we are, you know, killing Christian children for their blood. So then it's like, you know what? Nothing really makes sense. It's so absurd. So for example, we see in text 3, after 9/11, who was behind 9/11? Do we know?
The Salafi.
Islamists, Saudi extremists, Sunni extremists.
It was Salafi Muslim extremists.
No one thinks this might have been the Jews. Really?
I'm sure some people.
Is that not a reasonable question to ask? Well, maybe it was the Jews.
Actually, there were some people who were saying that Israel had planned it.
Okay, look at text 3. Look at text 3. Conspiracy theories are rarely logical. By the way, it's something good to know, okay? Conspiracy theories are rarely logical. It is not surprising, then, that even as Al-Qaeda took credit for the September 11 attacks, the group did nothing to stop a rumor claiming that the Jews were really responsible. The rumor alleged that Israel, specifically Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, was behind the plot and had warned Jews not to go to work at the World Trade Center on the day of the attacks. On September 18th, just a few days after, an editor for a website known as the Information Times posted a message claiming that the terrorist government of Israel cannot be ruled out as a suspect. The editor did not identify a motive or provide evidence in support of his allegation. In his words, he was simply raising a reasonable question. 5 days later, Al-Manar, a TV station based in Lebanon, stated that Mossad had indeed warned 4,000 Jews who worked at the World Trade Center to stay home on September 11th. Within days, that rumor appeared in newspapers and electronic mailings around the world. People continued to believe the lie, despite the fact that about 18% of the known dead were identified in obituaries as Jews. There was no evidence whatsoever, no basis to this claim. Reasonable question. Why not throw it into the mix? It'll be more exciting. So it's absurd. And there are many other claims. Just why not blame the Jews? Doesn't have to make sense. Doesn't have to be reasonable. Doesn't have to be rational. Why not? That leads us to point number 3. Point number 3 is how so often it's contradictory. One claim contradicts the other claim. As long as we're killing the Jews. The Talmud tells us of a story of Hadrian. Hadrian was known to be as a known Jew hater. Someone walks by and Hadrian asks, "Who are you?" He replies, "I'm a Jew." He says, "A Jew? You dare walk by King Hadrian and not greet me?" He sends him, he says, "We should cut off his head." Okay. Next person walks by, the next Jew saw what happened. So he walks by Hadrian and says, "Hadrian, good morning, good to see you." He greets Hadrian. Hadrian says, "Who are you?" "I'm a Jew." "A Jew has the audacity to greet me?" Cut off his head. Well, someone asks Hadrian, says, "Well, do you want them to greet you or do you not want them to greet you?" He says, Don't tell me how I should deal with the people I hate. After World War I, the Emperor of Poland was meeting with Woodrow Wilson. They had a conference and he had some demands. And he tells Woodrow, he says, listen, if my demands are not met, I don't know what's going to be. The Poles are going to get really upset. They're going to get drunk and massacre the Jews. Okay. And what happens? He asks, if your demands are met. Oh, if they're met, we're going to celebrate in the street. We're going to get drunk and massacre the Jews. That's the unfortunate truth. Very contradictory. I want to show a video which is about a great rabbi who lived during the Second World War, during the Holocaust. He was actually part of, we'll see in the video, the story of his life. He was there. He died during the Warsaw ghetto uprising. And we'll see what he writes about this. So give me a moment as we share the screen. Okay.
On the east bank of the Vistula River, in the Warsaw suburb of Praga, a Jewish boy was born in 1883 and named Menachem, he who brings comfort. His father, Elazar Zemba, died shortly after, and the boy was raised by his grandfather. He became rapidly known as a dazzling genius and formidable Torah scholar, corresponding with the best Torah minds of his era. Menachem Zemba married at age 18. His wealthy father-in-law supported him for 20 years while he studied and put pen to paper, authoring over 10,000 pages of original Torah insights, including commentaries on Maimonides' magnum opus and on the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 volumes of halachic responsa. His fame spread globally. He was offered rabbinical positions, including the office of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but he humbly shunned leadership. Leadership was thrust upon him in 1935 by order of the Grand Rabbi of Ger. The humble rabbi joined the Warsaw Rabbinate and proved his worth, becoming a world authority on Jewish law and a foremost spokesman for Polish Jewry. Before reaching age 40, Rabbi Zemba was appointed honorary secretary to Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, the Council of Great Torah Sages, populated by sages twice his age. In 1937, he twice addressed the full assemblage and was treated with awe. Then the Nazis arrived. Jewish Warsaw was reduced to a ghetto. 460,000 people were imprisoned in just 1.3 square miles. Starvation, disease, deportation, murder. Despite repeated offers of escape, Rabbi Zemba refused to abandon his flock. To them, he was a rare pillar of comfort. As one of a handful of rabbis who survived in the ghetto until its final days, he rallied his desperate brethren with powerful messages of hope and determination. He recorded an insight into the nature of anti-Semitism before the war. In light of his subsequent experiences under Nazi depravity, his words ring with timeless poignancy. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They are hated because they are overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are indolent and parasitic. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative. and also because they advance progressive and secular ideas. The reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. Shortly before Passover, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising erupted. Amid furious fighting and flames, Rabbi Zamba calmly conducted a Passover Seder as if nothing was amiss. But on the fifth day of Passover, April 24, 1943, Rabbi Zamba was gunned down by Nazi bullets. The community he shepherded with love and sacrifice came together at terrible risk to bury their beloved rabbi in a temporary grave. His family was deported to Treblinka. None survived. His lifetime of copious writings rose to heaven in the Warsaw fires. Hardly any of it survived. In 1958, his body was exhumed. Tens of thousands of people amassed, including an array of leading Jewish sages, to lay the heroic rabbi to eternal rest in dignity. Reality has proven that this righteous man was right. There is no legitimate reason for the hatred leveled in each generation against the innocent men, women, and children of the Jewish people.
Okay, so you have it over there. This is also written in text for this exact quote as well. So it's contradictory. Now, talking about the absurdity of these claims of anti-Semitism, just it's important to make 2 points before we go on. Point number one is the claims of anti-Semitism, many of them are so nonsensical and so delusional. Like many conspiracies, we say, don't confuse me with the facts. You ever heard that, right? So no matter what we talk and how we educate, and it's a reasonable thing to say, you know, you got to educate. And of course, it helps to a degree. It's important to educate, and there are many organizations today which are doing just that, educating people about what Judaism really stands for. And we see Josephus did that, right, with his book against Apian, right? Obviously, helped to a degree. But at the same time, there's something called like a self-sealing quality, where certain theories in certain people's minds are like immune to challenge. So whatever you say, they'll say, you know what, either you're part of the conspiracy or I don't care, right? I don't agree with it. So it's obviously difficult. So we have to work on education, but it's obviously not the answer because for some people, it's just there. Point number two, perhaps a little bit more important, is the name anti-Semitism. Where does it come from?
Sem is the son of Ham, Sem, and can't think of the third one, but it's from, you know.
So Noah had 3 children, Ham, Yafes, in English it is Japheth, and Sem, or Shem in Hebrew, Sem. So Abraham was a descendant of Sem. So anti-Semites means the people who are against the descendants of Abraham. So first of all, so was Yishmael, which means so is the Muslim. Islam is also a descendant of Abraham, which is from Sem. And so is Christianity. We all know Christianity started with the Jew, right? So it's also a Semite. So actually, these 3 religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are referred to as the Abrahamic religions, right? We're all descendants of Abraham. So we're all Semites. And obviously, there are many anti-Semites from these religions. There are many Muslims and many Christians who are anti-Semites. So it's obviously not an anti-Semite specifically because it's more specific than just a Semite. But that's beside the point. But who coined this name, this term, anti-Semites? You could call it Jew hatred. But no. Jew hatred sounds too evil, right? Jew hatred? Who hates people? Oh, we're anti these people. We're anti-Semites. And that's why it's important to know that although we are going to be using this word, because this is the word that's known today, anti-Semites or anti-Semitism. But what's the origin? So let's read this inside on text 6 on page 57. You know, there are many people who are anti-something. It could be anti-democracy or anti-nationalist, right? And once you say you're an anti-something, you're basically coming to the table. Let's have a discussion. You're for it, I'm against it. There's pros, there's cons, right? We can have a civil discussion. So anti-Semitism was meant to be just that. Take such an evil hatred and say, you know what? We'll call it anti-Semitism. It sounds good. We could write about it. We could write books about it. We could discuss it. We could go to universities and discuss this phenomenon, right? It sounds educational, right? But truthfully, gotta call it for what it is. Let's read text 6. Mar Wilhelm, German writer, political theorist, and agitator. In 1879, Mar founded the Anti-Semites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism. Mar's organization reflected his secular racism, which existed inconsistently alongside his religious anti-Semitism. His self-proclaimed goal was to free Christianity from the yoke of Judaism. Mar coined the term in German, antisemitismus, however you pronounce that in German, anti-Semitism, which for him denoted a secular racial hatred for Jews. He used the word anti-Semitism, this is really the key of this text. He used the word anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational, sanctioned by science belief. So, it's a discussion that we can have. But the truth is, a much better name and a more accurate description of this phenomenon is really what we find in Jewish writings. How Jews describe this anti-Semitism. So we have from Gluckel of Hamel, who was a Jewish businesswoman in Germany during the second half of the 17th century. And she authored a memoir that was actually written in Yiddish originally, talking about life in Germany at the time. And she talks about a story that occurred in 1687, right? 350 years ago, whatever it was, right? 340 years ago. And in short, she was living in Hamburg. There was a non-Jewish resident of Hamburg who was sentenced to death by the local authorities because he killed 2 innocent Jews. Imagine that the German authorities sentenced a non-Jew to death, capital punishment, which made an uproar with the non-Jewish residents of Hamburg. How is this possible? A non-Jew should be killed for doing nothing, just killing 2 Jews, right? Text 7 on page 58. One day, this is from Gluckel. One day, on the day of the murderer was sentenced to death, there was a commotion in Hamburg that has not been seen there for hundreds of years over any man sentenced to death. The lives of all Jews were in danger due to the extreme, here's the word, rishus. Rishus means evil, wickedness that has been roused. That's a better term. It's simply evil wickedness. So we're still going to be using the word anti-Semitism, but this is just an important note to make before we go further, to understand that there's no rationale to it. I mean, it's not an irrational, justifiable type of hatred. Well, that's what it is. So now we're going back to the question we originally began with tonight's discussion. Why? The million-dollar question. Why? What is the explanation of anti-Semitism? And now that we have these 3 points, we understand that this is an ancient hate. It's been around forever. How is it possible that something which is so absurd and oftentimes contradictory is still around? It's a good question. And from the fact that there are so many answers, only shows how good the question is. Yeah.
It seems to the absurdity, the inconsistency, the stupidity is a given. Why? And you point out its ancient origin, Greece and Rome. But then you skip 2,000 years to the Holocaust, and you leave out the prime cause for what we call modern anti-Semitism, the Catholic Church. In the Gospels, there's anti-Semitism. The founding fathers spewed it. Augustine did, Ambrose did. And I don't understand how you can have a discussion without any reference to the Catholic Church's role in anti-Semitism, which this book does.
So good point, Mike. So two points. First of all, we mentioned that anti-Semitism was around before Christianity. So it's hard to say that this is the cause of it when this notion of anti-Semitism was there before Christians, right? We're talking about hundreds of years before.
But you didn't have throughout Europe, and most people in this room are most likely Ashkenazi, but throughout Europe, you had the popes for 2,000 years preaching in effect nonviolence and sanctioning local priests in each, throughout the areas you have described.
The pogroms, all in the name of religion, yeah.
Talking about Jews responsible not only for the death of Christ, but the failure to admit his resurrection. And that's preached, and violence against him is preached by the church, not by they, but by the church, by the popes. And we're protected. The Jews aren't going to stop anti-Semitism. You live in a Christian society. It's got to be the Christians, the non-Jews. You know, we talk about internalizing.
So this is one of the things that it's a very good point, Mike. You're making a very, very important point about internalizing it, whether we should or shouldn't, who is at fault over here, and how do we deal with it? So we are going to deal with that momentarily about internalizing it. The truth is, they do not go into the history of the church and how from the pulpit of the churches we had preaching anti-Semitism. The point that we're trying to make is that, first of all, it was this notion didn't begin with the church because it was around before. We did mention already the idea that a lot of the Christians were saying that the gods don't hate the Jewish people. So we had that notion, and we'll see actually momentarily in text 8 where we also mention that as well, not in great length, but we touch upon that briefly. From Jonathan Sachs in text 8, but very, very good point that you're making, Mike. And the point that we want to do is we want to take a few moments now to discuss some of the reasons, some of the whys to anti-Semitism, and then we'll see what the Torah, a Torah perspective, and then most importantly we'll see the attitude, the approach, the orientation of these explanations. Are they inward or are they outward? Are they blaming the Jew, like we're doing something wrong, or are we blaming the haters, that it's all it's all in their court? So that's really where we're going in tonight's discussion. But you bring up a very good point, Mike. Yashikov, thank you. We're not done. We're still in the middle. Okay, so that's the $1 million question. The question is why? And like I mentioned, many, many, many explanations given to it. And the mere fact that there are so many explanations is only indicative of the fact that it's a good question. It's really, because not one answer can answer all types and shapes and forms of anti-Semitism. So I want to read text 8 from Jonathan Sachs, where he mentions various explanations. And then I'll also like to open it and see maybe Mike had an explanation, and other explanations as well. Text 8 on page 60. This is from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. There has been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. Some have seen it in psychological terms, displaced fear, right? If you're angry at someone, but you can't express it on that person, so you express it on someone else. Externalization of inner conflict. You're angry, but you have to let it out on someone else. Projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat. Others have given it a socio-political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilized change. Why not? They're different people, let's blame it on them. Yet others view it through the prism of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotyped outsiders against whom a group could define itself. Yet others, noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among the very faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their absence to Abraham and Judaism, they trace their descent to Abraham and Judaism, favor a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of Oedipus. We seek to kill those who gave us birth. What's the Oedipus complex? Where Oedipus killed his father in order to marry his mother. Freud talks about that even with young children. And the idea over here is that the other religions, like Mike mentioned, Christianity and also Islam, because they were born from Judaism, so they feel like we have to destroy, we have to kill, we have to get rid of our father, got to get rid of Judaism in order to have our religion, right? That was the feeling. That was preached. Now, obviously, not one answer answers all of the issues because, as you know, anti-Semitism is not only with the religious. It's not only with the Christians. It's not only with the Muslims. There are many secular atheists who are anti-Semites. There are many people around the world with many other religions that have this hostility to Jewish people. So yeah, in Europe was maybe the dominant reason was the churches and Christianity, but you can't say this is the reason that explains all of anti-Semitism. It would be strange indeed if so a complex phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations. Now I want to also open it up. If you have, maybe someone wants to share other ideas, other explanations to explain perhaps the why of anti-Semitism.
I know it's been going on a long time,
Right.
but I believe that the European church, you know, and the Inquisition and all, it was easy for greedy people who wanted more land, more businesses and all that, which were leaders in the church, to tell their followers anything because people couldn't read. I mean, when Gutenberg came out with the printing press, they thought the leaders were saying this is from the devil, don't do that.
They wanted to keep the people
Because
illiterate.
as soon as people
Yeah.
have, if they had access to the Gospels, they would have found out there wasn't anything in there that was full of hatred. So a lot of it is just evil people in control and ignorant people following.
Very good point. Yes, Jen. Yeah.
So what I just keep thinking about when reading all of this is, I mean, you could do this class about so many different groups. I mean, you could do it about, anti-Semitism, you could do it about racism, you could do it about all the Islam and Muslims, whatever that happened after 9/11. I think just like minority groups, people that are different from them is, because everybody I'm mentioning is a minority group. So there is some sort of hatred for pretty, you can come up with something for just about every minority group. So I mean, that's kind of the simplest explanation is that, if you don't like people that are different than you,
I hear you. People are just different. You don't fit in. You're not one of us, and that applies equally, perhaps, to other minorities as well.
You get it right.
And by the way, and one of the responses that we'll see actually helps minorities, not just Jewish people, all minorities. Yep. Mary.
Which, there's just a very strong tendency for humans to direct their insecurities, create fear, and then identifying an outlet. I think we've seen this happen with so many things in the past 4 or 5 years. With it's so alarming that humans have this tendency to, I guess it's fear-based, but just assume that there's an explanation for their own difficulties. And our leadership gave voice to a lot of hatred. And we're dealing with it now.
It's very current.
Control people through fear.
I'm sorry?
You can control people through fear. If you stood their insecurities and what they don't understand, and you know that they don't want to understand, in conjunction with just being ignorant and not, how do I say it, tactfully.
We're quite a mess right now.
I don't know how to put it tactfully, and I'm not gonna say it here.
Smart. Yeah, I hear you,
But
Mary.
you know what I
It's
mean.
not,
Yes.
it's also not just like religious or racial groups. You're also talking about, people in the LGBT community that are, all the time getting all sorts of, whatever. So again, just people that are different from themselves.
People who are different.
People don't know how to respond sometimes to.
Well, I think several people said it, but I really think all of it is fear-based.
This one's, they don't know how to act around somebody different from them. They don't know what to do. They don't.
And
There's a
so
great
you keep
tension
telling them
right
that the
now.
boogeyman is dangerous and he's coming for you and he's gonna cross the borders and you're. And if you don't know how your government works, which most Americans don't, because they don't teach civics and they're not, and nobody really, they're spoon-fed. Well, this is what government does, and that's not necessarily what government does. That's what they're telling you.
It seems like we're split 50-50. I mean, there's a tendency of many people to be conservative. They want to conserve, they don't fear change.
Right.
And then you have another group of people, and it's about 50-50, that something happens and they see it as an opportunity.
Right.
Oh, they're progressives. There's this incredible tension, and it's
Just people don't talk to each other.
I don't know, but we need a balance, and to see legislation come forward that we have to vote on amendments on Saturday. I think, well, actually, early vote is already started. And so scary.
Yeah, so these are many explanations. Some of them were written in the text, other ideas as well. And like I said, there's no one answer that this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer. It's all true. I mean, these are all true answers to that feed into this idea of anti-Semitism. And you're right, not necessarily anti-Semitism specifically, also against other minorities. Obviously, tonight we're focusing. The topic is anti-Semitism. But what we're going to do now is that we are going to take a few minutes to discuss what the Torah itself teaches us about anti-Semitism, right? This is a Torah class, right? So we're discussing anti-Semitism from a Jewish Torah perspective. And we're going to see how this perspective helps us respond to anti-Semitism. So let's get right into it. So the story that we mentioned last week as well, it's this story of anti-Semitism in the Torah itself is the story of Purim, right? It's a beautiful story where we have an anti-Semitism trying to annihilate, kill the Jewish people, and we're saved. There's so much we can learn from this story to our present day as well. So we have over here two main characters here in the movie, is Haman and Achashverosh. Achashverosh is the many more main characters. There's Esther and there's Mordechai, but we're talking now about Haman and Achashverosh. There's the king Achashverosh, who pretty much rules the entire world at the time, and his minister Haman. Achashverosh is known to be a foolish king, a melech tipesh. That's what the Torah tells us. He was a very superficial person. Haman was more of a wise, deep person. He had a better understanding. He had a deep Jew hatred within him. What's the story? Haman comes to Achashverosh and says, listen, there's this nation, there's this people that live amongst us, and they're different. They don't act the same. They have their own holidays, they have their own diet, they have their own language. They're just their own people. They're not part of us. Let's kill them. And in fact, I'm willing to pay you 10,000 gold or silver kikars, silver, weights or whatever it was, the measurement. I'm paying you to agree to sign the proclamation that we're killing out the Jewish nation. And what does Achashverosh says? Keep the money. I don't need the money. Keep the money. I'll do it for free. No problem. Let's do it. Let's go ahead with it. So the Talmud tells us something very interesting. The Talmud gives us an analogy of the Achashverosh type of person and the Haman type of person. It gives us an analogy of two people who have two fields. Each one has a field. Field A and field B. Field A has a problem. There is a mound. There's an extra pile of sand in his field. Field B has a problem. There's a ditch. There's a ditch in his field. Field A has to get rid of the mound. He's willing to pay for someone to take away his extra sand. Field 2 has to fill up his ditch. He's willing to pay someone to come bring sand to fill the ditch. But one day, Field A and Field B meet. They say, you know what? We're not going to pay each other. We're happy to do it for free. You take my mound, fill your ditch, and we're good to go. This is what the Talmud says, what happened with Achashverosh. And there's depth, there's explanation. What's the message? An analogy in the Torah is not just, hey, let me use a cute analogy, but there's a message over here. What's the message that the Torah is teaching us over here? They're telling us the character, they're telling us the motives of someone who is a Jew hater. Achashverosh hated the Jews, and Haman hated the Jews. Two very different types of people. Achashverosh, as we said, was a very superficial person. He was saying, Jewish people, they are a mound. I want a field that looks nice. It's clean, it's straight, it's nice, it's uniform. It's not. There's a mound. They're Jewish people. They don't fit in. They're extra. I don't need them. Get rid of them. Why? He probably didn't even know why himself. Just because, very simple. I don't need them. They're different. They're not part of my family. They're not part of my culture. Get rid of them. That was Achashverosh. And on the one hand, it's difficult to deal with someone because it's not rational. It's not like I can have a debate. But on the other hand, because it's superficial, it's easier in a way to turn them to the right side, as we see later in the story about Achashverosh. We'll get back to that. But let's focus for a moment on the motives of Haman. Haman had a ditch. What does that mean? What does it mean he had a ditch? Haman was very, very well off. He had all that he needs. He was wealthy. He was a high minister, an officer in the kingdom. He had a nice family, had many children. He had all that he needs. What's the last two lines on text 10? On page 63. What does Haman say when he sees Mordechai the Jew? But all this means nothing to me. Each time I see Mordechai the Jew sitting at the palace gates. Every time he walked by Mordechai, something within him, as you say in Yiddish, his kishkish were turning over. Something was boiling within him. What was it? What was bothering him? He loved it. He's walking, the whole city is bowing to him. Okay, there's one little Jew sitting on the corner. Who cares? Ignore him. Be an adult. No, it bothered him. It made him sugar. It made him crazy. He couldn't sleep at night. Literally. Until he came up with this idea of the gallows and hanging Mordechai. What's his issue? What's the problem? Ignore a little Jew. He's a little rabbi. Okay, he's having a good time. Ignore him. He's such an important minister. You're getting involved with some little stupid idea. You have it all. What was bothering him? How did Mordechai's presence? It's almost a fact that there was a Jew in his face, that there's someone that he saw as a Jew that bothered him. It was like a ditch. It was a void. It was an emptiness. There was something missing in his life. What is that? So this is a Jewish concept that we're taught, that a Jew represents something. This is a Jew, whether they are an observant Torah, observant Jew, or even a secular Jew. As we know, Jew haters don't differentiate between religious and non-religious. Hitler killed everyone equally, right? What does a Jew represent? God created a world. The world has its own values, its own ethics. And from ancient times, Judaism, Jewish people were always progressive. They were always the ones to introduce new ideas. Ideas that today we all understand that this is true, this is basics. I'm not sure how many of you were at the course we gave a number of years ago, Judaism's gifts to the world. We spoke about 6 different areas, things that we understand today as a given. Human rights, caring for others, charity, taking time to spend with family, taking time to rest. So many ideas that we have today were introduced to the world by Jews, by Judaism. Jews, as long as we don't have the Messianic era, Jews are like a thorn to the world at large. We are here to say we're not comfortable with status quo. We have to grow. We have to be ambitious. We have to come up with new ideas. We can't just sit and say, oh, I had a productive day. Great, I can go to sleep. No, we're never comfortable. We say we have to do more. We have to do more. We have to change. We have to always, it's like we're very mission driven. We're very ambitious. We're very purpose oriented. Right? This is what the Jew stands for. When Haman saw the Mordechai, what did Haman see? Haman says, I'm happy with my life. But when I see someone who stands for godliness, stands for mission-oriented, stands for purpose, stands for meaning, he felt empty. He felt, I'm missing that. I don't have that. And because of that, he felt he has to get rid of it. Just get rid of the Jew. And this is what the Talmud tells us is another motive for Jew haters. It's what a Jew represents. It's in the DNA of a Jew. Nothing that they do, it's not about if they live up to Judaism. They can be not the best person, not the best Jew, but they're Jewish. They have that DNA within them. That bothers the Jew hater. That he feels the ditch, he feels the void in his life. Or her life. And that's what Haman was going through. And that's why, even though Haman had all that he has, just walking by Mordechai bothered him. It made him uncomfortable. There's a quote that they say, perhaps they attribute it to Hitler, Yamach Shammai. And the quote goes, conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. Historians debate whether he did say it or didn't say it. But that's the same idea. Conscience. Understanding what's right and what's wrong. Helping others, directing others to what's right, what's wrong. He didn't feel comfortable. It felt he had a void within him. So this is the explanation that is given in the Talmud. Now again, we're not saying that this is the explanation to explain all of anti-Semitism. But what's important, more important than the actual explanation, is the orientation of the explanation. And like Mike mentioned briefly earlier, this explanation doesn't internalize anti-Semitism in the Jew. Because we could have inward anti-Semitism explanation or an outward anti-Semitism explanation. And what's most important is we have to have an outward explanation, which means it's not my fault. Nothing that I do is a cause of others to hate me. All about the Jew hater. It's not about the hated. It's not about me. It's about that person. It's like a bully in school. A child comes home, I was bullied, I was made fun of, I was beaten up, I was, right? So what do we say? Oh, maybe if you change, maybe if you try to act differently, maybe you get dressed differently. We don't tell that to the child. We tell the child, the bully has an issue. The bully has to have help. And they could get help and they could maybe be more sensitive to others. But the bully has to change. It's in their court, it's their fault. We don't blame the victim. And that's the same with Judaism. We don't blame ourselves. It's very unhealthy to internalize anti-Semitism and blame ourselves. So whatever the explanation is, whether it's Christianity, the churches, or whatever it is, what's most important we have to realize, it's not our fault. And the response to anti-Semitism changes, whether we internalize it or we send it back at them. There are many movements within Judaism and throughout the ages within Judaism, within Jewish communities, where they felt that it's our fault. Maybe we're too different. Maybe we're we're too much in their face. It's a problem. We stand for something that is something which is making them uncomfortable. So we have to minimize. We have to lower our standards in Judaism. And it went from extreme to extreme. Obviously, the extreme examples of internalizing anti-Semitism was conversion. No, let me convert out of it. I'm done with my religion. Or complete assimilation. But other took a lesser extreme approach, and they say, you know what? Maybe we should give up on certain traditions in religion. Maybe we don't have to keep Shabbos. We don't have to do kosher. We don't have to, talk about the Jewish belief of the Jewish people being the chosen people, which we spoke about recently. About obviously, it's not about being better than anyone else. There's an explanation for itself. But the point is, don't talk about or don't live a life which we are different than everyone else. Shabbos or anything like that, right? That is one approach. And this is an approach that in history was taken by certain communities. And the truth is, it didn't help. It didn't work. So we have in 18th and 19th century, or 19th and 20th century in Germany, where many German Jews dropped their religion. They felt if we're religious, like the old ancient, shtetl, Ashkenazi Jews, where there's always pogroms, and they always felt that they're different communities. If you want to solve the problem of anti-Semitism, you got to assimilate. We got to be like everyone else. And they dropped their Judaism. And the German Jews were known to be fully assimilated in the German culture. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were performers, they were involved in entertainment. I mean, they were everywhere. Many Jewish German doctors and things like that. And what happened? How did it work out for them? When Hitler came to power, the Nazism didn't differentiate between religious and non-religious. What did it say in the Strummer, the famous Nazi propaganda paper? That all the problems start from the Jews, right? They didn't differentiate. What happened in Spain? In the 15th century, where there were many conversos, or Marranos as they're known. Now we know that there were some Jews who converted, they were coerced, and secretly they were keeping Judaism. Now there's a debate amongst historians about whether this was the minority, a small percentage of Jews were conversos, or was it most or all? Bibi Netanyahu's father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, was a historian, and he writes very clearly, he brings many, evidence for this, that the vast majority of the Jews who converted to Christianity in 15th century Spain did it completely. They fully accepted Christianity and they dropped their Jewish religion. They weren't secretly keeping Shabbos or secretly going to synagogue on Yom Kippur or anything like that. They were fully into the Christian religion. Nevertheless, were they accepted? No. They were persecuted and they were blamed. And they would say, oh, you must be secretly being Jewish. I'm not. Show me evidence. It didn't help. It didn't work. So when we internalize it, when we say, it's my problem, and if I am maybe less Jewish, things will change. It doesn't help. We saw it doesn't help. And all it does is it gives the haters more control. It gives the bully more control. So that's point number one in regards to the orientation, not to internalize. A person feels a void, a person feels a lacking. You know what? Maybe they could change. Maybe they could say, you know what? Let me embrace some of the ideas of Judaism. Let me learn more about Judaism. What does it have to offer? How could I change? How could I maybe also be living more of a noble life like these people? But the second point is another important point. And this is the point of an open identity, an open Jewish identity. There's a big question that Jews always have. Until today, we have this question. It's a struggle. And the question is, how open should we be about our Jewishness? Should I wear my Magen David necklace or my Chaim necklace on top of my shirt or under my shirt? Should I wear the yarmulke? Should I not wear the yarmulke? Should I be noticeably Jewish in the workforce or not? This is a question that we all have. And oftentimes we say, you know what? I'll be Jewish. I understand that I'm steadfast in my religion, but I'll reduce it. I'll reduce being distinctive. I'll reduce being openly Jewish. People should notice me as someone different. In 1862, there was a poet by the name of Judah Leib Gordon. And he wrote a poem. And it became in Israel one of the most famous poems for one line towards the end of the poem. And it was a poem written in Hebrew. And the Hebrew words that he wrote was, Heye Adam B'tzeitecha V'Yehudi B'Ohalecha. Which means you should be a person when you're outside, when you're traveling, when you're in the open, and a Jew when you're home. Which, by the way, means that you're only a person when you're being Jewish. You're not a complete person, which is obviously a problem. But the point that he was trying to make is keep your Judaism to yourself. Don't stoke anti-Semitism. Don't be in their face. Which is obviously a problem. Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky says a similar idea. He has an interesting anecdote, an interesting thing that happened to him while he was on the train. Read text 12 On page 66. I was once traveling on a bus, dressed in my customary garb, wearing a broad black hat and a black frock coat. A man approached me and said, I think it's shameful that your appearance is so different. There is no need for Jews in America to be so conspicuous with long beards and black hats. Okay. I'm sorry, mister, I said to the man. I'm not Jewish. I'm Amish, and this is how we dress. The man became apologetic. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir, he said. I did not mean to offend you. I think you should be proud of preserving your traditions. It speaks for itself. Do Jews belong in America? Do Jews have a right to live in Canada, in Australia, in Great Britain? If we have the right to be there, we also have the right to be there without any preconditions. And we can't be asked to sever ourselves from our identity the moment we cross the doorstep of our home. If we belong in a certain place, if we're accepted here, we're accepted as we are. And this is, again, all minorities. We could dress as we like to dress. And no difference whether it's from a government law or policy, or if it's self-censorship. But we have to know for ourselves. We belong here. We can be here as we are openly. No reason why we shouldn't be able to have a public menorah displayed. No reason why we should be afraid of having a mezuzah on our doorstep. We can be Jewish. We're openly Jewish. In Teaneck, New Jersey in the 1980s, the Jewish community was hesitant of putting up a public menorah. Said, "Oh, we don't have to do this. It's America. We don't have to be so publicly Jewish, and in the town square." And the Rebbe wrote them a letter. He wrote a long letter, and he wrote that there is no reason really for this free country to hide one's Jewishness as if we were contrary to American life and culture. Sometimes after an anti-Semitic act, we find that more Jews are openly Jewish. Barry Weiss, we quoted her last week. She writes that after the massacre in Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, that's when she started wearing her Magen David necklace openly. Now I'm a proud Jew. There's once a Jew, I forgot the details of the story, but there's once a Jew who used to go to work with a yarmulke, a kippah, and he was proud of who he is. He was confident. He used to go in day in, day out. He had his yarmulke on. One day he gets called. He's going into a meeting with the CEO, and he understood that he's getting a very significant promotion in the business. Very excited, nervous. He goes up to the office, and as he's walking into the office, he's debating. Yes, yarmulke. No yarmulke. Yes, yarmulke. No yarmulke. In the last minute, I guess a moment of weakness, he said, probably be better if I don't have the yarmulke. Maybe the meeting will go better. Takes it off, slips it into his pocket. He walks into the meeting. He sits down in front of the CEO. The CEO greets him. The first question the CEO asks, don't you usually wear the head covering? Oh man, he's thinking, yeah, I usually do. I just took it off in the meeting. He sees that the CEO isn't pleased with this. He says, the reason why we decided to give you a promotion, because we saw how confident you are and how proud you are of who you are. And you don't care about what others think about you. You're proud of who you are. Now I see that you're a little wishy-washy. So obviously this idea of being proud of who we are is not just for Jewish people, it's for all minorities, and it helps other minorities. When we're proud of who we are as Jews, it helps other minorities being proud of who they are openly and comfortable in a diverse country as we have it. But more importantly, that we're talking, in tonight's discussion, talking about outsmarting anti-Semitism. This is a healthy response to anti-Semitism. Meaning it's not only a gut reaction. Hey, despite your hatred, I'm going to be proud. You're not going to control me. You're not going to tell me how to live my life. I'm going to be a Jew. Have at it. It's not only that. It's not only despite. This approach actually helps reduce anti-Semitism. This is an answer to anti-Semitism. How is that? Every anti-Semite has some kosher Jews on their list. Hitler has some kosher Jews. I hate the Jewish people. They're terrible people because my neighbor, he's a good Jew. He's different. He's not a regular Jew. He's different. He's not, he's special. He's good. I like him. He's kosher. But the Jewish people, terrible, right? We all have that. Sometimes it's the Jews that they actually know. Oh, these people, they're different. They're good people, but the Jewish people are terrible. We have to, and many times we are that Jewish person. We're a coworker, we're a neighbor, we're a friend. They know we're Jewish, and they like us. They're good with us. And they say, oh, she's different. He's different. Despite their Judaism, they're different. We have to show them that's not despite of our Judaism. And this takes us back as well to the story of Purim. A very interesting idea if you think about the story. And sometimes, it's a long story, 10 paragraphs, you kind of lose track of all the, what brought the cause and effects of the story. What happened over here? Esther has this party with Achashverosh. I think you all know the story. And she reveals her true identity. She tells Achashverosh, you know who I am? I'm a Jew. You and Haman have this terrible decree against the Jewish people. I'm one of them. It's my people. I am a Jew. And what's Achashverosh's response? We say he's a very superficial person. What was his response? Oh, okay. Sorry, mistake. You're Jewish. I didn't know that. Okay, you can fight back. The decree is over. What happened? What happened? Haman came to Achashverosh originally and said, these people are different. These people don't fit in. We have to get rid of them. Achashverosh agreed to this notion. He finds out now that his wife, the Queen Esther, is Jewish. What? Suddenly the Jewish people are good? Suddenly the Jewish people aren't different? Wait, they don't have their own laws? They don't have their own culture? Wait, now they're not different? What changed? Achashverosh could have easily said, okay, Esther, I'll save you. You won't die. Maybe you have a few family members. We'll save your family. But the Jewish people, we still got to kill them. They're still terrible people. What changed? You know what changed? Achashverosh loved Esther. Now, he didn't just love Esther because of superficial reasons. He loved Esther because Esther was a good person. He saw good qualities, noble qualities in Esther. Now that Esther says, I am Jewish, it was like a bolt in his head. You know what he realized now? You know where these qualities come from? These good qualities I see in Esther comes from her Jewish education, her Jewish religion, her parents, her Hebrew school, her community. This is where it comes from. It's not despite her Judaism, I love her. It's because of her Judaism that I see this beautiful qualities and I love her. So therefore, he said, okay, Jewish people are different. It's okay to be different. It's okay to be different. That's okay. But there's so much goodness within them. And this is what we have to do as well. So it's not, I'm going to fight back. I'm going to be a proud Jew, which is also true. But it could help reduce anti-Semitism as well when they realize that what they see within us, I'm an honest person. I'm a noble person. I'm a good worker. I work together. I'm part of the team. Well, you know who I am. I had a Jewish education. I'm Jewish. This is where it comes from. So no reason to say, you're different, but I don't like the Jewish people. No, it will give some food for thought for this person to think about, says, wait, well, maybe the Jewish people aren't as bad as I always heard about them. I might have read an article about Jewish people. You know what? I see Jewish people, and because of the Judaism, they're good people. So obviously, something's wrong over here. So this is how we could actually change to a degree. Obviously, we're not going to fully defeat it, but to a degree, we could work on actually changing people's attitude towards Jewish people. I'm going to conclude with a story. The story is the first Chabad Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, was in prison for many accusations, false accusations with him, with Turkey, whatever, long story. He was in prison, and one of the ministers, the Russian ministers, who was very learned within the Torah, and really enjoyed, a very wise man, really enjoyed speaking with the Alter Rebbe, with Rabbi Shneur Zalman, while he was in prison. And one day he comes to him and says, what is this? What it says in Genesis, that when Adam and Eve sinned with the tree of knowledge, they ran and they hid. And then God came to the field, to the garden, and said, Ayeka, where are you? What, God didn't know where they were? Or they were hiding from God? Is it even possible? And so the Rebbe answered, yeah, the explanation that God wanted to kind of start the conversation. It was a conversation started to kind of break the ice. And the minister says, yeah, I know that explanation, but I want to hear your explanation. I want to hear something with more spice. I need a better explanation than that. So the Rebbe tells him, okay. Ayeka, God is calling out to each and every one of us. Where are you? Where are you in your mission? Have you fulfilled? Have you had productive days, meaningful days? Where are you? Are you lost? Be purpose-driven, mission-oriented. This is the question we have to ask ourselves as well. And this is a question that it's not just a Jewish question, but this is what hopefully our conduct, this question will be asked to others as well. And they should ask themselves, Haman, instead of getting so angry at the Jew, because you feel a void when you see someone living with purpose, instead of you feeling the void, you should ask yourself, Ayeko, where are you? Maybe you could fill the void by living a life of more meaning. Take the ideas that Judaism teaches and apply them to your life. That may reduce the hatred you have to Jewish people. So that is the idea for tonight's class. Outsmarting anti-Semitism, understanding the why, the many explanations, understanding what the Torah says about the attitude of someone who feels less meaning in life, a void. And most importantly, it's the orientation, not to internalize, but understand it's not who we are. It's within the hater, not the hated. And therefore, we have to live as proud Jews. And on the contrary, when we live as proud Jews, and people see how we are openly Jewish, and they understand that Jewish people are good people, not despite, but because of the Judaism, hopefully that will reduce some anti-Semitism as well. I want to conclude with a video that kind of wraps up the ideas that we spoke about in tonight's discussion.
I gave up Hanukkah guilt at work last year. I made a lot of friends.
Yeah, there you go.
Lesson 2. No apologies. 1. The absurd and contradictory claims of anti-Semites have persisted for millennia. Attempting to refute these conspiracy theories may keep some people away from anti-Semitism, but it has proven to be a futile endeavor against hardcore haters. 2. The term anti-Semitism sounds more like a theory and fails to convey that this phenomenon is actually evil wickedness. 3. Much has been said about the root cause of anti-Semitism. One approach sees it resulting from an inner void due to the lack of a true sense of purpose in life. The Jew represents a commitment to living for a higher purpose and dedication to the mission given to humanity by the world's creator. Anti-Semites wish to obliterate their inner emptiness that they are reminded of when encountering the Jew. 4. Hatred exists in the mind of the hater, not the hated. We must avoid internalizing anti-Semitism and imagining that changing elements of our Jewish heritage will solve anti-Semitism. 5. Jews and other minorities cannot be expected to be bifurcated people, severing themselves from their identities in the public sphere. For a minority to have rights in a given place means that it can have a public presence. Being open about our Jewish identity benefits Jews and other minorities. 6. For some potential haters, the best antidote against stumbling into anti-Semitic views is knowing Jews who are upright and of noble character, and noticing that this goodness is linked to their Jewish identity, upbringing, and way of life. To have this influence, we must be open about our Jewish identity. 7. A Jewish explanation for anti-Semitism must allow for the possibility of change, because the Jewish prophets insisted in God's name that anti-Semitism will eventually cease altogether. 8. We can reduce anti-Semitism by teaching the world to avoid an inner void, by embracing God's mission for all humanity.
Next week, same place, same time, we will continue the discussion talking about Israel. Is Israel being singled out? Is that considered anti-Semitism? That will be the discussion of next week. Fascinating discussion. If you have any questions or comments or rebuttals, tonight's class, I'm here as long as you keep me. Mike.
Rhetorical question.
Rhetorical question, okay.
All those rules that were just set forth and fine, accepted. Now tell me the impact that has on the men marching in Charlotte who are saying Jews will not replace them. Got an answer?
Great question. And as you mentioned, we're not, it's rhetorical, but I think the answer to the rhetorical question is that we're not here to defeat anti-Semitism. Like we mentioned last week, it's here. And for the extremists, it's going to be very, very difficult. Now, are there stories how some extremists actually suddenly became Jew lovers? Yeah, there are stories, but the few and far in between, given. And you're right. Anti-Semitism is a real thing. It's a real problem. And for the most part, it's not going to be defeated. But what we could do is we could try to reduce with some of the people that we encounter. I'm not going to encounter, and anytime I don't see how I'm going to counter the people that were marching in Charlottesville. People who are openly white supremacists who are shouting Nazi slogans against the Jewish people.
They just hate everybody.
I mean, you're right. I mean, I don't know if I'm ever going to have a coffee with them, right?
I said they just hate everybody that's not like themselves.
I'm saying even if it's singled.
Most likely hate Muslims too.
I'm saying even if it's singled out for Jewish people, even if it's someone specifically targeting Jewish people, if I encounter them and I have a conversation, I don't know if it'll have any effect on them, but for the most part, I'm not sure if what I do is going to affect them. But I know what I do could affect people who I work with, who you don't know what people are reading and what people are thinking, and then once in a while, they mistakenly say something where they don't even realize how this is so offensive to the Jewish people. And these are just ideas in their head that the more they see other Jewish people, and the more they meet with other Jewish people, and they see how, wow, these are good people, these are almost subconsciously could change their attitude towards Jewish people. So defeat it, I don't think it's possible, at least not with a miracle.
Those extremists don't bother me for that reason, because they just, like the lesson said, it's the haters' problem. It's not our problem. They just hate people because of, there's nothing that we as individuals are going to do about them. They're going to have their thoughts and their feelings, and they're going to whatever. And also because it's just really ludicrous. It just sounds ludicrous. It's like, okay, they want to look stupid and, look at, run the streets with swastikas and whatever, that's their problem. I mean, like, it's like almost like it's too ridiculous, it's too extreme. It's like, ultimately they're the ones that are looking stupid and they may not realize it, but they are,
But
it's their problem.
There's nothing stupid or unintelligent about the people who are their leaders. Hitler was not stupid, he was wicked, he was immoral, he was a killer. But he was not stupid any more than Tacitus is stupid. But they both voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric. And it's not our problem, that's true.
Right.
But it's not, they have leaders, and those leaders are allowing that to go on. And I don't mean just in the political sense, but those people who marched in Charlottesville, just using this example, were not legalists, but those leaders are encouraging the anti-Semitism.
Okay,
And they're the ones who are responsible, who more than we're the victims. It doesn't mean we're powerless. I think everything the rabbi says is important, but we're not going to stop anti-Semitism. It's been around as long as Jews have been around. So, I mean.
that's what I'm saying, like, it's, things that are that extreme.
The problem is that
There's nothing-
whitewash extremists. There are a lot of people who are businessmen and people who are in our communities are thought of as leaders of the community and in the business world that were there. That is not somebody that, it's their problem. It becomes our problem. It becomes everyone's problem. And those people are there and they were there.
Extremists are extremists, and not to say that an extremist can never change their views, but I think the focus, first of all, the focus is obviously on us, not on the haters. So it's, but at the same time, there are like the people that we do mingle with, that we do come in contact with, our acquaintances, those people could have, we could have a very positive effect on the way we act on those people. We're not here to defeat anti-Semitism. Like you said, it's here, it's going to be here. There's only so much we could do. But maybe someone before, or God forbid, who joins a group like that, or even on their own, right? They have these things that just passed down from their parents, or things that they read, or a book that they read, or a movie that they watched. And the more they see how, this is an upright person, this is and they're Jewish, and they're proud Jewish. Wow, that could kind of get them to think of what their attitude to Jews should be.